second part of today's session. It is going to be highlight of today, live discussion and Q&A with Dr. Schiebinger. This session will be conducted as a form of interview with Dr. Schiebinger and 3 interviewers who are the participants of ELIS 2021. Ashton Bendy from University of California, Irvine in the United States, and Jisoo Im from Ewha Women's University in South Korea, and Chloe Lee from University of Melbourne, Australia. For us to be able to focus on the interviewees and interviewers throughout the session, I would like to ask ELIS participants for your cooperation. Except for Dr. Schiebinger and the 3 interviewers, could you all other participants please turn off your video and mute during the interview so we can leave 4 of them on the screen neatly. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Because our interviewers are going to introduce each other, and let us begin the interview session. And let us welcome Ashton, Jisoo, Chloe, and Dr. Schiebinger.
Well, hello, everyone. We are super glad to have you with us today, Dr.Londa Schiebinger. So the way this is going to happen is I'm going to introduce us, and then we're going to go some gendered innovation specific questions, and then some general and personal questions, and then we're going to transition to some live questions. So first up is Jisoo Im, who is located in Korea right now. Jisoo, the stage is yours.
Hello, Dr. Schiebinger. As Ashton introduced, my name is Jisoo Im, and it's such an honor to meet you. I'm actually conducting related studies as a part of Korea Center for Gender Innovation, so I was kind of surprised that you mentioned this in the previous talk, and I really have to say that I'm greatly influenced by your works. I have 4 questions about your program. First of all, Kristen from Michigan did one about the fixes. In today's talk, you have come up with 3 key fixes. How did you reach these 3 fixes? And is there any reason why you chose fixing the knowledge the most important? And we are also curious about where you have noticed the most or least progress being made in fixing the knowledge.
So the 3 fixes are historical, really. In the 1980s, the National Science Foundation in the United States started programs, funding programs to increase the number of women in science. And it expanded that then to women in underrepresented minorities a little bit later, and then women, underrepresented minorities, and people with disabilities. So that was the number 1 fix. The number 2 fix, fixing the institutions and making institutions welcoming to these newcomers, right? You don't want to have lots of newcomers and then cram them into the same tenure system or the same, institutions that we had. This was really happening in the 2000s. Again, the NSF, the National Science Foundation in the US, funded something we called the Advance program, which gave large grants to institutions to redo them specifically for women. So there were programs on, helping women. Well, it wasn't just helping women build self-confidence, but having administrators understand how women and other newcomers might negotiate differently, right? To understand that there would be gender differences in attitudes and behaviors. And also there was a lot having to do with becoming more family friendly. So that's fix number 2. Now, fixing the knowledge really began, for funding agencies, it really began in about 2000 and, I don't know, hard to date exactly, but 4 or 13. So we can say that feminists or people in gender studies have been critiquing knowledge for many, many years, like for 30 years. But for funding agencies like the European Commission to say, look, if you want public funding, you must in fact include sex and gender and diversity analysis because you want the science to benefit everyone and not just a privileged few. So, so my fixes come from historic developments, and I think fixing the knowledge is most important because, you know, that's what I do. But it's important to understand that they all work together. You can't actually fix the numbers if you don't accept the new ideas and perspectives that new people bring, right? You can't fix that unless you do the other fix. So I like to see how they work together. And there are a couple of articles that have been published that talk about that. Then your last question was ambiguous. Could you restate it, and then I'll see what you mean?
Where you have noticed the most or least progress being made in fixing the knowledge?
Okay, so I don't know if you mean disciplines or if you mean where geographically. Did you have, I could talk about both of those things.
Well, it's from one of our participants named Christine. So maybe it would be great if you cover general things.
Okay, so where we've made most progress, if I take it from the point of view of disciplines, of course, all of this came from the humanities and the social sciences. So let's just say that, first of all. And now it's been spreading to the natural sciences, to engineering, to computer science. And I think we've made a lot of progress in all of the biomedical fields and in biology, because people, you know, understand that organisms have sex and that there are sex differences. We're quite aware of that. And now, so that's important. And also, when it comes to health, you can actively see that medicine does not help everyone equally, right? So that's been something that's extremely visible, something that we can see and count, and so you can look at the progress. Computer science is going crazy right now. People are aware that AI has embedded biases. If any of the data sets are biased, whatever you apply, any machine learning you apply to that is also going to amplify those biases. So computer science is going crazy. Engineering is kind of beginning to catch on, like mechanical engineering, not something like electrical engineering, because I don't know how much gender stuff there is in electrical engineering. And something like theoretical physics, I don't believe you're going to have gendered innovations in the knowledge. There's a lot we need to fix in the institutions and the cultures, but not maybe in the knowledge itself. And pure math, you know, also. Once you apply any of these things, there's lots to do, right? We can see how that is. Now, if we say, so geographically, or where has this taken off? We really know Europe is one of the leaders. The European Commission has been leading this, and they've made requirements for their grant proposals. So it really does take off, because if you want the money, you have to do the right thing. North America is also doing very nicely. And well, really, I think Korea is doing a wonderful job. I've been working with Hyung Paik and Hee-Seok Lee for many years now. They founded the Gendered Innovations Research Center. South Korea has passed through legislation that you will have some requirements for funding. So I think this is really marvelous. Japan is working on it. And Latin America, we're having, you know, they're starting out. So it's great. Whenever somebody starts, they're going to, you know, once they see what the story is, they're going to make progress.
Thank you, Dr. Londa Schiebinger. Sorry. The next question would be about fundings. Well, you have already mentioned fundings, but I have to ask one more time. Personally, I was really shocked that there are so many case studies, like the example you gave us, the crash test dummies that overlook women's distinct characteristics. And I've heard that this is all because of the cost, money, because it is much easier and cheaper to get the male data, even though they are aware of these differences based on sex and gender. Studies are willing to be biased. Here, Joanna and Lucci come up, came up with a question. Does this mean there are not enough investments on female related or specific minorities like transgender? If so, how can we promote others' interest and convince them to fundings?
Well, I think, well, funders now are beginning to require this sort of thing. So I think we will see big changes coming up. I have to say the National Science Foundation in the US is not asking these kinds of questions. They're not asking for sex, gender, or diversity analysis. I'm hoping very much that we can move them along in this. So the crash test dummies are interesting because this has been known for a long time that women aren't included. And our national, whatever it's called in the US, it's called something in each country, the National Transportation Safety Board, something like that. The people who oversee the car makers, they have not insisted that these dummies model different people's bodies. So transgender would be interesting to look at. Elderly people are really at risk because as you grow older, your bones get more fragile. And we know that now obese people, the dummies actually model Americans. Our dummies model Americans in like the 1960s and 70s when people were much slimmer. 40% of our population is now obese, and those dummies don't model them. So and obese people tend to slide under the seatbelt. It's because the weight is distributed in a way that was not expected, has not been studied, let's say. So I think now we must be more vocal. We must insist. We have some power because we buy cars, we buy different things. We can just insist that our safety be taken into account. I think everybody can. Not that we should have to, it shouldn't depend on us, but hopefully through education, that engineers are beginning to learn about this. The crash test dummies are really simple, right? It's not hard to understand. So I would think we will be getting this problem fixed pretty soon, I would hope.
Thank you. Dr. Schiebinger, you also mentioned that Korea is doing very well in establishing this gender innovations, but in some countries, it could be hard to apply that 3 fixes yet, like making structured changes and making related policies could be a struggle itself. One of our ELIS participants, Lada from Thailand, shared her story that in her country, girls are ignored not only in STEM fields, but through their entire lives, and which I think most of our Asian participants could find the same. So I would like to ask you, what are the effective ways to promote and expand this gender innovations in different cultures with high gender inequality?
Well, I really only work on knowledge, and you're talking now about a whole system of cultural change, which is huge. I think that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a very important way to do that. The gender equality, number 5, is important. There's health and education. So I wish we could strengthen the United Nations. They have excellent goals, and we need to do everything we can to help implement those goals. I know the Gender Summit. I don't know if you all know about the Gender Summits that are run very often, and it's been wonderful because they're virtual, and so I can visit them when they're in Europe or in Asia or wherever they are. And Elizabeth Pulitzer, who runs the Gender Summit, has done she did an entire summit on how gender is understood in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And she wanted to get people to connect the dots, right? To really see how they can implement that in their country. And I think that efforts like this are really important. So my greatest hope lies now in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because those are international. And I do understand that in many countries, women and non-binary people and transgender people and, gender queer people, that all of these people, we don't enjoy the same freedoms as maybe some women in the US, not all women in the US, not all transgender people. So in many places, there are still huge inequalities, and I would like to do more. I do as much as I can, but I think we need to support each other, and also really the United Nations and international organizations.
Thank you, Dr. Schiebinger. And this would be my last question. Today, you have introduced astonishing accomplishments, and we could also find more in your website. So I'm wondering what's left. Like, could you please share or recommend some fields or topics that still need to consider more about the gender aspects so we can dip into studies?
Oh, yes. Well, there's so much. We've just started with marine science, for instance. I was so pleased to find this young man, a postdoc at Exeter University in the UK, who published this great article on marine science. And I've now invited him to everything, because we need to see, I think there's a lot to be done with gender and climate change. I think this is one area we need to solve climate change first, maybe before we even, don't think I'd ever say this, but before we solve the gender problems, because otherwise we won't be alive. So that's where I would suggest we focus our interests. And there's so many interesting things here. We did a case study on smart mobility, and we had one on urban design, but there's much more to be done in designing our environments to be sustainable. Like the US is laid out, we have suburbs, and no matter what you do, I cannot go to the grocery store from my house without getting into a car. And I love to ride my bike, but it's too far. We're spread out in these suburb things. So we need to reimagine how the built environment and how we can make it so that people can get things locally. We don't waste energy and get pollution from, goods coming from all over the world. So that's where I would put my efforts if I were a young person. In fact, I was thinking the other day I should just teach about climate change, but that's not my preparation. So that's what I would do. But there are many, many areas where we still need, I think, there are just so many. We have a very cool case study coming on nanomedicine. And there's some nanomedicine where you're treating cancer, for example, using nanoparticles, which are sent intravenously into the body, and they target the tumor. And what was so interesting, the reason we're doing a case study, this came out of a lab in Israel. If you are a woman and you have cancer, you might want to know how these nanoparticles interact with the menstrual cycle. So it turns out for ovarian cancer, it's very helpful if you insert the nanoparticles during ovulation. They double up in the ovaries. But if you have breast cancer, it doesn't really matter. The particles really don't get to the breast tumor in the way that they should. So many innovations are required here. There's just so much. It's so exciting. Just go for it.
That nanoparticle topics perfectly fit for me, like as I'm studying biosensors with magnetic nanoparticles, and also about the marine studies. That would be a great news for Ashton. She is studying marine science. And thank you for so much, Dr. Schiebinger. This is all from me. And from now on, I will toss my mic to Chloe.